Good morning. Today is February 12th, and this is a work session of the Government Operations and Health Facilities Subcommittee of Health and Government Operations. We have 9 bills to consider today in our work session, and we are joined by Committee Counsel Lindsay Rowe, who will help us work through these bills. Let's start with the first one, HB 73. And Lindsay, please remind us what this bill does.
This is a departmental bill which raises the size limit for real property leases exempt from state procurement law from 2,500 square feet to 5,000 square feet. It also decreases the number of days that the Department of General Services must advertise a need for the state to rent building space from 30 days to 20 days before proposals for a lease are due. And finally, the bill repeals a requirement that proposed leases be advertised in daily or weekly newspapers and requires instead that they be posted on the DGS website and on eMaryland Marketplace. There are no amendments from the bill sponsor. The bill sponsors, it's a departmental bill, it's DGS. There was testimony opposed to the bill from the Press Association.
Okay, thank you. Is anyone here to speak to this bill?
I am Wendy Napier with the Department of General Services, Assistant Secretary, and I believe our Deputy Secretary is here as well.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Is there anything that you or the Deputy Secretary would like to add?
Good morning, Delegate Carr. This is Chichi Nyaganesh, Deputy Secretary, Department of General Services. We do not have anything to add, but are available if there are any questions at all that still need clarification on this bill.
Thank you both for being here. Seeing no discussion, do I hear a motion on the bill?
Motion to move the bill.
We have a motion
Second.
and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for Delegate Hill.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my hand up and I'm looking at all the things that came over and I'm trying to pull. Is the press representative here? You asked about the department. Is there anybody from the press here?
No, that was Rebecca Snyder who was in the bill hearing
And
for this and other bills. She is not present.
I'm sorry, I'm not ready to vote. Is there any way we can go on to the next bill? But if you have to call the vote now, you have to call it now, and I'll just hold off to the committee vote session.
Okay, Delegate Johnson.
Yeah, there was some talk about sole sourcing when we discussed this bill, and I would like to hear a little bit more about that. So if you could consider Delegate Hill's request, I would appreciate it as well.
And who would you like to hear from, Delegates Johnson?
Whoever could speak to us on the sole sourcing part of the bill.
Can anyone from DGS discuss sole sourcing?
Delegate Carr, this is Wendy Napier again, and I'm here to discuss and answer any questions that you have.
Okay, please go ahead.
So was there a specific question or anything you wanted me to follow up on?
Delegate Johnson?
Tell us a little bit more about the sole sourcing part of the bill. Exactly what does that mean? Who does it include?
Sure. So as the law stands right now, the statute provides that any space requirement that is over, really over 2,499 square feet must go through a competitive lease RFP process. And our request was to increase the threshold to 5,000 square feet, which means that we would not have to use a competitive process. And what that means behind the scenes is we would still be seeking multiple offers from landlords for their buildings to lease the space. But what we found, and this is a point that I did not make last week, but in talking with my team, I wanted to highlight this today. These small space requirements, it is costly at times for a landlord to respond to our RFPs. They are required to provide an architectural space plan to show us how they will fit us into the space. And for landlords of small buildings, because we are seeking smaller spaces, for those landlords, this can be cost prohibitive at times. So one of the reasons we're suggesting this is to lighten the burden on the landlords of these smaller spaces we're seeking. It does also help us move more quickly to go out and secure spaces. This is especially beneficial in rural areas where there really are very limited space options, and we're seeking to move as quickly as we can to try to locate either a new agency, or in certain times we're looking to relocate an agency if they've not had a favorable working relationship with their existing landlord. We're looking to relocate them. So this sole source mechanism will be used to help us move more quickly, help limit the costs and the burden on the landlords that are looking to compete for the opportunity. Our goal is always to seek at least 3 options, even when we're not using a competitive process. We are always behind the scenes trying to show that there was competition. This change is really just about, for us, it's about time and funding on the landlord side, trying to limit their burden in responding to RFPs for these very small spaces.
But I recall in discussion, you guys said you use certain brokers. What I'm getting at, I don't want the independents, I don't want our landlords out there to be left out of the system.
I can't hear you, Delegate Johnson. Can you move closer?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I
Can you
could
me?
hear the
Can you
question,
hear me any
sir.
better? Can you hear me any better?
A little bit.
Yeah, my concern was that when we spoke I heard in the hearing that you use certain brokers. And my concern is I don't want our independent landlords to be left out of the opportunity to possibly lease their properties.
And thank
And
you for
said
that
you wanted to
question.
move
And
quickly. So that when you say you want to move quickly and that you use certain brokers, that tends to make me think that our independents are going to be left out.
and this is not an effort to leave the independents out. We do work with a lot of, again, in rural areas, small landlords that may or may not have a broker. When we go into an area and we're looking for space, we use our standard tools of CoStar, but we also just go into the area and look at the geographic area that we're trying to relocate to, and we'll reach out if there is a property that's available or a property that we want to pose a question about. If it's available, we will reach out to those local landlords who may not have brokers. I have several instances in our lease portfolio where we're working with landlords that did not have brokers. And while we ourselves use a broker, we're not requiring landlords to have a broker. So please know we're not trying to exclude smaller property owners. In fact, this change for this size of a lease, 5,000 square feet and under, would help a small, hate to use the term mom and pop, but would help a smaller landlord because they would not have to go and have an architectural drawing prepared. They could work with us behind the scenes, ensuring that they're offering a competitive rate, but they will not have that burden of providing that upfront, as I said, architectural drawing that could cost them several $1,000s to respond to an RFP.
If I could have a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Delegate.
Thank you. So do the independents, if your broker finds a property that they're not representing, do the independents, do they have to pay that broker or do you pay the broker?
So they do still pay the broker, but understand that we are not trying to shortchange them in that process. So what we do is communicate to the landlord whatever broker commission is being charged, and that it's all dependent upon the amount of space, of course, and the rental rate that's agreed to. But we instruct them, incorporate that into your rental rate that you're offering the state. We want you to be fully compensated. We don't want you to be out of pocket or be disadvantaged in this process. So we try to be very upfront that yes, we're charging this commission because it's the way that we operate. We have a lot of benefit from this broker contract, a lot of resources they bring to the state, but we work very closely to make sure they're not disadvantaged in the process.
Okay, and how many brokers do you use across the state?
So we have a contract with CBRE, and they have subcontracted with an MBE provider, Birch Advisors. So it's those two companies that we work with. And we have a team, I want to say 4 to 5 brokers that they are based in our office, and they work throughout the whole state. So it's that team, but because CBRE is a national, even international firm, they have contacts spread across the state. So for example, if we're going down on the shore to try to find a lease, if we're having difficulty, they may reach out to their local CBRE contact for support. And again, if we have trouble locating a space, we will literally go down, drive through the area, really dig deep to reach out and find property owners that can help us meet our need.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Delegate Johnson. Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to follow up. I think at the hearing, there was no issue that was raised that this was being done because it was costing the state money. It was just that it wasn't efficient. People weren't responding to newspapers. It wasn't even that there weren't enough circulation. So I guess my question is, why or how would the department feel about continuing to say that you advertise in a local paper if one still exists? I mean, paper being online, e-paper or otherwise, if indeed one exists that takes these notices, and that you also post to the department's websites and e-Maryland Marketplace. So the question is, why are we taking one out and replacing as opposed to just adding this additional method?
And Delegate Hill, I think the response there is that we have seen really no response to newspaper ads. That's why we were asking to move it to our EMMA system or whatever the state platform is, and to our DGS website. It really comes down to that, just what we've observed, that we're not finding that we're receiving any response back from these newspaper advertisements. And so it's a cost savings not to expend those dollars. But yeah, that is what I could share, ma'am. But I hear your concern. If we had observed any response back, we would have a different request in our bill. But it really comes down to that. We're just not receiving any feedback.
Okay.
How do you determine if the response comes from a newspaper?
Our brokers will ask, it's a question we ask, how did you learn of this opportunity? Because we want to keep track, are people learning from Emma, from our website, or was it direct contact? Were we directly soliciting? So we do ask that question.
Do you have those numbers for us? And what the cost is what cost savings do we have by completely eliminating any responsibility for advertising in local papers? Versus just adding this as an additional way of doing, because I'm sure there's not much cost to us to put it on the e-marketplace or on your website. So I just like to know, since you say we're saving and we get nothing, if you have those numbers, it would be nice. And of how many
Sure. So
on each route, right?
So that we have always historically used the daily record. If there was no local paper, at a minimum, we would use the daily record. If there was a local paper, we would try to go into that paper. So we're talking, different publications, different pricing, but I know it could the costs I've seen in the past, I'm just going to estimate around $200 average for each newspaper requirement. If we have an RFP that fails, say we don't receive a response and we have to reissue that. So if we're looking at, say, 20 advertisements a year, that's $4,000, just round numbers for you. So I know it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but I think from our perspective, $4,000 is being spent and there's no response coming from that. That's why we were looking to pivot to a different model.
Well, I would request, even if we vote on this today, that before we go to Friday's session, that we get those exact numbers over the past 2 years, what you've spent and which newspapers or resources, whether it was the Patch or the Baltimore Sun or the Banner or the Washington Post. And the reason I say that, I mean, if it's always going to the Daily Record, I understand why no one's responding. In other words, if we're only going to e-marketplace, the Daily Record, and things that people know to go to, as opposed to what they would be using other way, we're not going to get people otherwise. And it just strikes me a little bit like when people say, well, we can't find qualified women or we can't find qualified people of color. And it turns out because we're not looking where they are. Right? We're expecting them to come through our routes. We're not looking to figure out where do they show up. And that's my only concern. And so, Mr. Chair, for me, I'd be very comfortable, even if it's only on a trial basis and we get a report after 2 years of not taking the other route, but allowing them to do e-marketplace, allowing them to do the website, have them come back in 2 years and show us those numbers. And then we could, if it's absolutely of no use, then we can save that $4,000 and knock it out. But it's we don't have any data.
Would you be satisfied with historic data?
I would be. Because and if historic, particularly if the historic data showed that they were putting it in in the Frederick Times and they were putting it, in the Hartford Courier, if they were putting it in that local paper that people use or the Patch or something. And not just the Daily Record. That would satisfy me.
Ms. Scott Meager, is that something you could get us fairly quickly?
I will reach back out to our team and try to get information on that request. So you're looking for the last how many years of?
Me too. And I would, again, and if it's a problem, I mean, I don't know how the other members of the subcommittee feel, but I would be fine offering an amendment to not take the others out and then ask you to come back in 2 years and tell us exactly how much you get from each source.
Thank you, Delegate. I'll be happy to work with our legislative staff and we'll follow up. And if that full data is not available, Delegate Hill, your suggestion might be a good path to proceed to. If we can't show you what the last 2 years have looked like, we can start from this point forward to gather that data.
Delegate Hill, we don't have many more weeks where I can say this, but we do have the luxury of time at this point. If you would like to hold this bill to next week as you originally requested.
Yeah, well, no, I don't. My request was that we could act on it and get that information
Before
by
Friday.
Thursday. But as we've discussed it, I would be in favor of moving that amendment. And if they come back by Friday with the information and we don't need the amendment, we don't have to take it. I don't think the amendment's a problem, particularly if the estimated costs are like $4,000. So we spend $8,000 over the next 2 years to be sure we're not blocking people out from participating. I don't think that's a huge thing. It's not an additional cost. It's cost that we're already expending. So I'm going to move the amendment.
Lindsay, do you have the amendment? And do you understand the amendment enough that you could?
It would have to be seconded too.
Well, so just to clarify, I guess I want to clarify a couple of things. One is the existing language requires advertising in daily or weekly newspapers with circulation sufficient to provide notice to the people of the state, or at least to the people affected of the affected locality. It doesn't preclude posting an email and marketplace. The amendment was taking out the requirement that it be in the newspaper, and instead shall advertise to the people of the state, or at least to the people of the affected locality and potential bidders by posting a publication on the department's website and email and marketplace. So you want to keep the newspaper requirement and the email and marketplace requirement.
Correct.
The second clarification I wanted to make is, do you want to include as part of the legislation uncodified language to require this report back in 2 years? Or is that something you just want to pose? We could send a letter
It
to
could be however you would advise as council would be the best way to do it. I just,
I guess I would defer to DGS on how quickly they think they could come up with it, because I don't know that there's a need to put in a report.
right. I think,
If
yeah,
they think they
uncodified
can come
language
back
is
with
fine.
it
Just
in
report
like
back to us,
couple weeks.
you know. Yeah, I think that's fine.
DGS, do you have
And
a
Delegate
response?
Hill,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, could I clarify a question?
Mhm.
So for the reporting going forward, you obviously want our costs, but do you also want us to share for each procurement, who has responded because of the advertisement? Is that part of what you
Right,
want
the
us to
number
report?
of people, I don't necessarily know who responded, right? But who, and sometimes people will respond to, they'll see you on two sources, right? They'll say, how did you know about this, right? We've all seen those little polls. But, and, you know, what did you advertise, right? So the list of the different, for each RPF that you put out, what were the localities? And for those localities, what print vehicle, right, including e-print vehicle, did you advertise to? And then did you get responses, not just who got the contract, but did you get responses when be saying, if we were doing magazines and television, did they respond to the television, that kind of thing, right? Who responded to the print, who responded to the e-marketplace, who, but not the who as in, I don't need to know specifics. I want to know how many, the 3 people responded to e-marketplace. We got 5 inquiries from our website, and we got 2 people who saw it in the newspaper and contacted us.
Okay, I think we understand. Let's go ahead and deal with your amendment before I get to Delegate Alston. So we have an amendment on the floor. Do we have a second on the amendment?
Okay.
Okay,
If it's
No
Delegate
second.
Hill's amendment, I second it.
okay. So we do have a second. Further discussion on the amendment, Delegate Alston?
I was just going to say, I agreed with the earlier statement to hold this bill for a week so that we can have more time to look at it. I just feel a lot of unreadiness. And it's enough time still in session, like you just said, for us to just do it the right way so we can see it, because I think it's an important issue and we should take a little more time with it. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah, Delegate Hill, how do you feel about that?
I'm fine, but sometimes we get limited in how many holds, and I didn't want this to be my hold, Bill, because
Yeah.
I think overall I think DGS is doing due diligence. I just think sometimes they don't know what they're not doing, and we're not asking them what they're not doing.
Yeah.
So
Delegate
either way.
Lopez?
Yeah, this is kind of a legacy hand from when Delegate Alston was talking. I just want to say +1. Like, I feel like in the interest of time, maybe move on to other things today, but and keep cooking on this one.
Okay, Delegate Chisholm?
I move that we don't count this against Delegate Hill and we hold it.
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
right, let's do that. We'll hold this bill till next week. DGS, thanks so much for joining us. And please come back with the information next week so we can move this one pretty quickly.
Thank you.
Lindsay, HB 77. And I see we have the archives here and we have Delegate Boucher.
We do. So as introduced, this bill established the Commission to Study African American Civil War Sailors in Maryland and required the commission to report its findings and recommendations to the Governor and General Assembly by December 1st, 2025. This is the 3rd time this bill's been in subcommittee. The subcommittee has previously discussed adding a member to the commission that's a representative from an African American veterans organization. And also, I circulated for this week, the subcommittee discussed adding the task of this commission to study the African American Civil War sailors to the previously established commission to study African American Civil War soldiers in Maryland, which otherwise has finished up its work and reported back actually in November. I kept saying December. They reported in November of last year their work, but that commission bill doesn't actually terminate, it doesn't sunset until June 30th of this year. So the amendment that I circulated would extend that commission for another year, add the study of sailors to their work, add the additional member, and ask them to report on the aspect of the sailors by December 1st, 2025. That is, an approach that we haven't previously discussed with the archives. So the state archivist and several of her colleagues are here today to discuss what work the commission has done last year and the work of this commission moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Boucher, anything to add before we turn it over to the archives?
No, just that I'm very, very grateful for the thoroughness that this committee is taking and the fact that 3 members of the archives are here, because sometimes I feel really lost and think it inappropriate for me to speak on their expertise. So I'm very blessed to have them here. I look forward to hearing from them. Thank you.
Okay, as do we. So members of the archives, whoever is prepared to go first, please go ahead.
Chair Kerr and delegates, thank you for having us here this afternoon. I'm Elaine Rice-Bachman. I am the state archivist. I want to thank Delegate Boucher for speaking with us about this bill and the addition to the previous commission. What I would want to clarify, and I have Emily Olin-Squires, Assistant State Archivist, and Chris Haley, Director of Research, here today to answer more specific questions about the content of this bill. But I just want to make it clear that last year's commission, the way the bill was written, it was very short. There were essentially 3 months to complete a report on the history of African-American soldiers. So we did complete a report, but and I hope that you have read the report, it is not a full study. It is essentially in that time period a bibliography of what could be done with more time and resources. We did put in a fiscal note last year that was removed from the bill, so we did not have any additional staff to work on this. In that case, because soldiers' records are really contained here within our collections, we could at least complete that bibliography of the resources available with a recommendation that if we could pursue this with more time, there could be more information found. So adding the context of sailors to this existing bill, we've again put in a fiscal note because in this case, in addition to just needing a staff person to shepherd this through, we don't have records for sailors here within our custody. That is going to require travel to other repositories. So it's even more essential that if for meaningful work to come out of these commissions and this expanded commission, it will require time and resources. And I will defer to Emily and Chris for any further context.
Emily or Chris, anything to add?
No, I think Elaine summarized it well, but we're here to answer any questions that anyone has.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Alston, I think that this was that this came about because of questions you had. Anything you would like to discuss at this point?
It is, but I saw hands up before me, so I'm okay deferring to my colleagues.
All right, thank you. Delegate Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It sounds like this falls outside of the scope of archives right now. Do we know there's got to be some nonprofits out there, some other organizations that do this type of work that we could hopefully piggyback on? Because it sounds like we're now going to task archives into reaching out to other departments, other organizations to dig up this information. My hope is that this information may already be out there somewhere, or there may be, like I said, nonprofits or people outside of our state agencies that can deliver the information that we're actually trying to obtain.
Delegate, Chair, if I may respond.
Please.
You've really identified something that is at the crux of the dilemma for us, because we absolutely have the knowledge and expertise. We understand the methodology of how to gather this. We have the contacts at the National Archives. We have the contacts at other historical societies, et cetera, where these records may exist. But as often happens with legislation, the archives is written in to staff commissions such as this, but no resources are provided to do it. So it means if a bill goes through where we're staff, because we do have the knowledge and expertise to fulfill it, we have to bump something out of our priorities in order to fulfill that. So, ideally, we would see support for our own agency to conduct that work on behalf of the people of Maryland. We absolutely understand how to do it.
You need the money to coordinate and to continue to
Some
take
travel
dedicated person.
funds
I got you.
and an archivist, a trained archivist who can work, who can shepherd that particular study through,
So in
Okay.
rather
order,
than us having to pull our staff off something else to do it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
so in order for you to complete the task that this bill assigns you to do, the $66,000 is pretty much needs to stay in the bill. The fiscal note is accurate. You're muted.
That would certainly be what we would advocate for. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Thank you. Delegate Hill.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And nobody wants unfunded mandates. So let me ask you this, and this is sort of a follow-up to Delegate Chisholm's question. There's a site called Naval History and Heritage Command, and they've got a section called African American Soldiers in the U.S. Navy, a chronology, starting in 1775. Does any of your experts there who are here with us today know if that is an incomplete record, or the what we're trying to do in the bill is be specific for Marylanders? I mean, why is the information that I find at this website not adequate to what we're trying to do? Why is this considered incomplete information, or is it?
Chris or Emily, I would defer to you on that.
I would just say simply, I have not looked at it. So that's specific to it has not been something that we've been asked to pursue earlier, and so I have not looked at it. I certainly would be open to looking at it and would check first for Maryland references and see where they are, and then I would double check that to see what is the source of that information. So it's not just Wikipedia.
I'll put it in the chat.
Great, that'll be wonderful.
Because I think that we're probably stuck. If we can't pay for this, we can't move it forward, but it would be good to know how close we are to having the information that the bill seeks to obtain, because if we can't afford it, then it may, and if this information is close, then maybe it's about how we simply incorporate this into the information we share. All right, thank you. I'll put that in the chat.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Hill. I guess we still have too many questions on this bill. I hope we can get something out of subcommittee today, but people from the archives, thanks for joining us. And if you could follow up on the questions that came up today, Delegate Alston.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, the archivist mentioned the existing work that they do, and I'm just wondering, how are the priorities made? Because you do have existing staff to archive the history of African Americans, whether it's the military, the sailors, but just generally in our state. How are those more high-level policy decisions being made? Because if you're the right agency to do it, not understanding then why it's not been elevated to the level of priority. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will initially answer that. In addition to any, we have we have 65 people in our agency. A handful of those conduct research. Chris and one other person, Hannah Lane, comprise the Legacy of Slavery in Maryland program. But a high majority of that staff, 1/3 of all staff, our primary job is public outreach and serving up records to the public. So on any given day, we're facilitating thousands of orders for the public. Research is what gets fit in for most of us with that extra time. Chris, I will let you speak directly to what are the current priorities in the Legacy of Slavery program, which would be the program where we would put this additional staff person.
Thank you, Elaine. A very good question, Delegate Alston. In general, I would say it can vary on a day-to-day basis, depending on who the researchers are who come into the archives, depending on the actual persons who send us emails, depending on the people who actually send letters, which get forwarded to us from our triage. So generally speaking, we're still a part of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which fortunately just completed all the hearings around the state. Now, it's very much a matter of us providing support to the report writers whose task it is to complete this by the end of this calendar year. Then we have 6 months at the end of that calendar year to actually have the sunset of that commission. So it's up to our commission members to decide what those tasks will be. April 4th and April 5th, we're having an institutional hearing, which will be held at the Reginald Lewis Museum. So it's still within the subcommittee that I chair, which is the research committee, to see what other, at this point, unforeseen final threads of those 38 to 40 individuals who were victims of racial terror lynching, what mysteries, what discoveries may still be out there. So we still have to, basically with a fine tooth comb, go through that to try to make it as complete as possible for April 4th and 5th, and certainly by the end of this year. We're also working on a continual project for mining the records of the federal census from 1830 to 1880 throughout the United States, well, it's not the United States of Maryland, although United States of America, although it is connected, of all the counties in Maryland where slavery existed. So we're listing all the free and enslaved Blacks and mulattoes for that time period, to include a database, which is accessible right now, where we've, through the 20 years or so of this project, we have about over 400,000 bits of information, but we still haven't completed it because primarily how we targeted it was specific through, quite frankly, federally funded grants, which came first from the National Park Service Network of Freedom, and we were targeted to get that specific appropriation. We began in 2002, and it was Prince George's County, it was Baltimore County, Frederick City. So that specifically was our mandate, and that's specifically what we focused on. Then we received a larger grant from we received that grant twice, so that we were able to approximately complete that. We subsequently received 2 grants from the Department of Education, Post-Secondary Education Underground Railroad Department, and that gave us enough money really to create this department of the Legacy of Slavery program. Within that, we were able to complete about 10 more counties over the course of 5 years. And that doesn't include all the different things that are thrown in there. We also contributed to the War of 1812 to try to document the lives of those soldiers who fought primarily for certainly our federal troops, but also those who left to go to England for the promise of history, of beginning their history there, which didn't really work out well as it comes down to. We're also looking at the Maryland Penitentiary Project, and that's one where we're going through right now with our staff as well as volunteers and interns, if we're able to afford them, to see what the correlation is between those individuals who have been virtually enslaved in our Maryland penal system since 1811 on as close as we can to current day, because we're trying to see if indeed, and we believe there is, if indeed there is a correlation between mass incarceration and the systemic creation of the over incarceration of people of color through those years. So I know I could go on and on and on, but that's basically what it is.
So thank you. And so I guess it sounds like you all need additional staff. And I guess my question then to the archivist is, have you put that budgetary request in outside of any of these bills? Has a request been made to the budget committee for additional staffing for the archives?
To the governor.
Oh, the governor, yeah.
Frankly, right now, we're just trying to hold on so that our half vacancy that we have is not abolished.
Matched.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to
Understood.
follow up on one issue that remains outstanding from previous discussions about what do you think about the idea that that we continue the prior commission versus creating a new one?
I don't have any concern about joining the 2 commissions. My concern is getting some meaningful product from those commissions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Delegate Shalega, final word on this before we move on. Delegate Shalega? Delegate Shalega. Third. You're unmuted, but you have no volume. Nope, not working. Okay.
She might try and log back on. It looked like she might have been frozen for a second there.
Yeah, I think you probably have to log off and back on. All right, I'm gonna move on. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to your responses, and this bill is to be continued.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
House Bill 82, Cyber Maryland Program, Lindsay.
This is another departmental bill from Labor, which transfers the Cyber Maryland program, including the Cyber Maryland Fund and Cyber Maryland Board, from TEDCO to the Maryland Department of Labor. The bill also repeals mandated funding of $99,000 annually to be used for talent pipeline management, and an additional discretionary authorization, expands the program's required activities, authorizes additional uses for the fund, adjusts the composition of the board and members' terms, and makes technical and conforming changes. I circulated an amendment on this bill from the Department of Labor, which adds the Adjutant General to the board and alters the bill's effective date. That was an issue raised by the fiscal note, which noted that the October 1st effective date didn't align with the fiscal year. So that's what the amendment is addressing.
I see. Any discussion on this bill?
If not, I move favorable.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to move favorable on
Moving the amendment.
moving the amendment. Thank you.
Yes, move the amendment.
Okay.
Second.
Same motion and second. On the amendment, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Delegate
opposed?
Shalega is in the waiting room. And aye. Sorry.
Can, okay, the amendment's been adopted on the bill as amended.
Move the bill as amended. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the bill as amended. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to this bill? Okay, thank you. We'll move forward with a favorable report from the subcommittee on House Bill 82. House Bill 188. Lindsay.
This bill prohibits any entity that is owned, operated, or controlled by specified governments from bidding on, submitting a proposal for, or entering into or renewing a contract with a public body in the state. To that end, by December 31st, 2025, the Board of Public Works must use credible information available to the public to create a list of entities barred from participating in procurement with a public body. The bill includes procedures for adding entities to and removing entities from the list maintained by BPW, and also includes penalties for making a false certification under the bill. There are no amendments to the bill. This is a reintroduction of House Bill 894 from 2024, which had a unanimous vote in the House.
Delegate Chisholm, anything to add?
Yeah, just one quick thing, because we did talk about the fiscal note. So I did some research and found out what other states do. The U.S. Department of State's Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, DDTC, maintains this list that identifies companies registered to deal with items controlled under the ITAR and shares that publicly with states. So I'll make a connection between BPW, if we're lucky enough to get this out of committee, and see how detailed it is to get that list provided to BPW so they don't have to do any extra work.
Thank you, Delegate Chisholm.
Thank you, sir.
Any motion on the bill?
Motion to move the bill.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on House Bill 188? All in favor of moving favorably, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to the bill? Okay, we will move forward to the full committee with a favorable report from the subcommittee on House Bill 188. House Bill 209. Lindsay?
This is another departmental bill. This one's from DeWitt. It repeals a duplicative requirement that each county government, local school system, and local health department, except for municipal governments, consult with the local emergency manager to create or update a cybersecurity preparedness and response plan and complete a cybersecurity preparedness assessment. There are no amendments on this bill.
Thank you. And I see we have Patrick Mulford from DeWitt here today. Patrick, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We are just here to answer any questions. I don't want to take up any more time than necessary.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for DeWitt? Does anyone have a motion on the bill?
Move the bill.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. There are no amendments. We'll move ahead with the bill. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? I don't see any opposition, so we will move forward. Patrick, thank you for coming. You have another one, so I guess you want to stick around. We'll move ahead with House Bill 209 to the full committee. And House Bill 221.
This is another DeWitt bill that codifies the Maryland Digital Service within the Department of Information Technology as a centralized unit that collaborates with units of state government to support improved service delivery to Maryland residents and agency staff through user-centered design, software development, and product management best practices. Units of state government must collaborate with MDDS to ensure the alignment and funding of digital initiatives with the overall goals and priorities of the state consistent with the statewide information technology master plan. There's also no amendments on this bill.
Okay, again, Patrick, you just here to answer questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just missed it. Are we on 209 or 221? Sorry.
This is 221.
221. Motion on the bill?
Move the bill.
Second.
I have a motion and a second on the bill. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of House Bill 221, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition to House Bill 221? Thank you. We'll move ahead with the full committee with House Bill 221. House Bill 235, Lindsay.
This is another DeWitt departmental bill, the last one, that makes the last one today, makes various clarifying and administrative changes to the state's regulatory framework governing state and local cybersecurity related to the responsibilities between DeWitt and MDEM. Specifically, the bill transfers the responsibility for supporting local governments in developing vulnerability assessments and cyber assessments from the Cyber Preparedness Unit in MDEM to the Office of Security Management in DeWitt. Repeals the requirement that the Cyber Preparedness Unit develop and regularly update training resources for local governments related to malware and ransomware detection. Clarifies that the Office of Security Management may take or direct actions required to mitigate a threat affecting or potentially affecting an entity connected to the state-owned internet network when a connection may introduce a serious risk to other entities connected to the network. Clarifies that OSM is not responsible in assisting specified local government entities in the development of cybersecurity preparedness and response plans. Repeals the requirement that OSM's annual report include an analysis of the state's expenditures on cybersecurity relative to overall information technology spending for the prior 3 years, and recommendations for changes to the budget. Clarifies that the Secretary of Information Technology is responsible for implementing information technology policies, procedures, and standards in a statewide cybersecurity strategy, in addition to developing, maintaining, revising, and enforcing the policies, procedures, and standards. I circulated an amendment from DeWitt. The report that I just referenced before was previously required on or before December 31st each year is being taken out. The amendment requires the office to report on or before the third Wednesday in January each year to the committees and the Joint Committee on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Biotechnology on the state's expenditure on cybersecurity relative to overall IT spending for the prior 3 years and recommendations for changes to the budget to improve state and local cybersecurity preparedness. So it's putting that report back in and moving the date.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Patrick Mulford? Delegate Chisholm.
So there was a letter in there, favorable with amendment, talking about some of the dates. Can I assume that that amendment addressed the concerns from the Cybersecurity Association based on their concern was, I guess, reducing legislative transparency and oversight because of one of the reports?
Yes, Delegate. The amendment puts the report back into the bill, and it just moves it till after the budget is released by the governor, so that we actually don't overstep executive privilege. Beforehand, we were not able to put as much detail into that report because the governor's budget had not been released yet. So this just works that out.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Patrick Mulford? Okay, do I have a motion on the amendment?
Move the amendment.
Second.
Second.
Motion and a second on the amendment. All in favor of adopting the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposition to the amendment? No opposition to the amendment. On the bill as amended.
Move the
Move the
bill.
bill as amended.
Okay, we have a motion and a
Second.
second. All in favor of the bill as amended, say aye.
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 Any opposition to the bill as amended? Okay, we will move forward to the full committee with House Bill 235. And Patrick, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
House Bill 284, Lindsay.
This is a departmental bill from MDOT. The bill clarifies that only fees collected for the use of electronic procurement systems that are due to the state must be deposited in the Operations Revenue Fund. One that they were talking about, that third-party BidX electronic procurement system.
Let's see. And the departmental bill, I see we have Nora. Nora, yes. Any questions for Nora with MDOT? There are no amendments. No questions.
Move the bill.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of House Bill 284, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition to House Bill 284? Thank you for sticking around with us, Nora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, subcommittee members.
Okay, with that one, we'll move forward to the full committee unanimously. Finally, House Bill 300. Lindsay.
This bill repeals a requirement that a state grant or contracted funded wholly by state funds or with a combination of state and other non-federal funds and awarded to a nonprofit organization that has not negotiated and received a specified indirect cost rate allow the nonprofit organization to reimburse indirect costs at a rate equal to at least 10%. Instead, a nonprofit organization may reimburse indirect costs at the de minimis rate established in specified federal regulations. Those are currently set at 15%. I circulated an amendment from the sponsor, which alters the reimbursement rate to the greater of the de minimis rate established in federal regulations, or 15%.
Okay.
Do the
I
amendment.
have Henry Bogdan here today, who was on my sponsor panel at the hearing. So I'm going to turn it over to him. And Henry, there's an additional amendment that just came out today in the Senate?
An additional amendment is being drawn that would provide that this bill would become an emergency bill. The concern here is that many service nonprofits with state grants that are federally funded are being squeezed, and state grants maybe are a way that if you allow us the higher indirect cost rates earlier than a normal effective date would at least help some organizations retain their stability and their ability to provide services. It's a small matter, but it's at this point, there are a number of organizations who are wondering if they'll be able to continue to operate over the next few months. So we would urge support for that amendment. The intent is that it be prospective. I have not seen the language of the amendment. When I say prospective, I mean that the 15% would only apply to grant agreements or contracts executed, renewed, or extended after the effective date, which would be the date the bill is enacted. It would not be retroactive.
Okay, Thank you. So we do have an amendment that's going to be offered in the Senate that we don't have yet.
So, Mr. Chair, I would ask if you've already offered one amendment that I've moved, would you accept the emergency as a friendly amendment to your amendment? Then we can move it as one amendment.
If everyone understands the amendment without seeing the full text of it, I'd be okay doing that. Let's hear from Delegate Shalega. No, we can't. Well, she tried to go out and come back in and did not solve the problem. Do we have any questions for Mr. Bogdan? Do we have a motion on the amendment with the additional amendment that's forthcoming to change the date? Delegate Guzzoni.
I'm sorry, it took me a second to raise my hand there. I'm just curious because I believe, Mr. Bogdan, that I've heard that the federal government has changed some of their language around the indirect costs. And can you explain what that might be? Or there's been an executive order to change it? Am I mistaken on that?
The executive order does not technically amend the uniform guidance, which governs most federal grants in 2 CFR 200. Those regulations have not been changed. However, we understand that agencies have been directed to cease allowing indirect costs over the level of 15%. I think that is targeted primarily in the health and research area. That we believe, and it's already been discussed in the media, we believe that will have severe negative impacts on research and health research. The institutions that typically carry that on have fairly large base infrastructure that has to be sustained. And it's that infrastructure that normally gets paid from indirect cost allowance. Financially, it would appear that much research would have to be terminated or suspended in order. We're not sure how it's going to work out, and I don't know if that order I don't know if that's subject to litigation yet. Our national council, which Maryland Nonprofits and their 40 other state associations are members, were the parties that got the first temporary restraining order on the OMB memo, now rescinded, but that order has still been continued. And of course, the state of Maryland is party to the case in Rhode Island.
Thank you. Delegate Johnson.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Bogdan, can you explain for the layman a little bit, kind of some things that are included in indirect cost, or as you said, infrastructure? Is this employees? What is this exactly?
Yeah, it's what are not direct costs, and it's essentially defined as what is not directly funded for the carrying out of a specific grant project. So what it does include would be facilities maintenance, the cost of organization-wide electronics, computers, security, communication, general staff training, the people who process payments, management. It's everything else that takes to run the organization, from paying the phone bill to the light bill.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Anyone else have any questions for Mr. Bogdan? Does anyone want to move the amendments?
Move the amendment again as modified. Second.
All right, we have a motion on the amendment as modified and a second. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition to the amendment? Okay, the amendment
Move
is
the bill
adopted.
as
Move
amended.
the bill
Second.
and a second. On the bill as amended, any discussion? Seeing none. Delegate Shalega, should we try again? No. You gotta take your computer to OIS, I think. All right,
Mr.
moving ahead
Chair,
with
it shows
the,
that she's still
moving ahead
muted.
with the vote. All in favor of the bill as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition to the bill as amended? We see Delegate Shalega and Delegate Chisholm. Any other opposition? All right. Lindsay, that completes our work.
It does, unless anyone wants to revisit House Bill 73 or House Bill 77 before we go.
Good suggestion. Does anyone want to revisit either of those two bills that we moved on from?
It's actually not a good suggestion because all the witnesses would have left already, so never mind. So yeah.
Can we make a bet on how many meetings it will take for House Bill 77?
Start a pool? Yeah. All right. That completes our work, everybody. Thank you, and I'll see you in committee in very shortly. And we are adjourned. Can